Yes, right down in the middle there. Yep. Joe. Oh, missed. Oh, we'll come back to Joe in a while, but...
Heather Whelan, CWAFA. The Country Women's Association does have a good relationship with all of you up there. But the problem that I have as a new national president is that I like our investigators to be working ahead so that when I need information I can just ring them up and say this is what we're working on now and this is what I need. So if you are getting any complaints that you actually need, you would like more information on, if you sent out and to say in your consumers, is there a problem in this area, I could then get our SIF team working on it straight away, because in every state we have a social issues fact-finding team that does the investigations for us and also does surveys. So it's helpful if we can actually start surveying in advance and find out what issues are before they become to the point where it's almost impossible to fix them.
Mm-hmm. And Heather, I wonder if you could pass the microphone to Joe just there.
Joe Benvenuti. I'm from the Consumer Utilities Advocacy Centre in Victoria, and we deal with energy issues, but they're very, very similar to some of the telecommunications issues under discussion today. And I'll start my conversation by saying with respect. And I suppose my with respect comment is that one of the frustrations for consumers is to hear conversations about the lack of information about what's going wrong in the market, when there are really clear indications of what's going wrong in the market through ombudsman schemes. And so through the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman Scheme and through the Energy and Water Ombudsman Scheme, for instance in Victoria, where we've had debates with regulators about what we see as really poor customer service in relation to door-to-door marketing and telesales. And we'll hear from regulators in energy that there isn't sufficient information to show that there are problems, where I think there really is sufficient information to show that there are problems. And I think that there is a real structural difficulty that we have now between ombudsman schemes and between regulators about what sort of actions are taken by whom. I don't have the solutions to that, but I'd like to sort of pose it to the panel to see what your suggestions are for how we convert what is thousands and thousands of customer complaints and stories and case studies into actually addressing the issues that are going wrong in the marketplace. And just as a final stinger, I'll say that one of the difficulties of letting ombudsman schemes get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, as in more complaints, is that they're obviously going to get, they're going to face the fact that it's getting harder and harder and harder to give actual customer service themselves to the people who are complaining, and that ultimately that comes back to bite them and consumers as well.
So perhaps then to Peter for some wrap-up comments, and you might want to pick up anything from that you'd like to respond to, bearing in mind in particular that you did tell us that your own complaints and inquiries are growing at quite a rapid rate, so that puts you, I guess, in that same boat.
Thank you, Alan. Look, there were a wide range of terrific comments and observations there, and I've been taking notes furiously, so thank you for that. A couple of things quickly. Confidentiality, Alan, you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Look, it is an important and difficult issue. It's very important for investigating agencies to treat investigations and with appropriate confidentiality. It's not used just as a stalling device, and sometimes the time frames can end up being quite long on complex legal matters. But if anything, it's becoming more challenging as mechanisms such as FOI requests are used strategically against regulatory agencies in litigation and whatnot. So it is a very important issue. I'd so like to assure people that it's not used as a sort of a pushback. Having said that, I think if you like, at one level up, around having confidential discussions, more informal discussions with consumer organisations such as ACCAN or members around here today, for that matter, industry participants as well, that's a vital part of the regulatory process and getting an understanding for what's going on out there. And that goes to the issues around trust that both Chris and Delia have raised. And I think it's vital that in terms of how the ACCC or other regulators are approaching some of these issues more generally, or what we're looking to target, or the sorts of discussions around the problems that are out there, that we're able to have some of those discussions in an environment of trust, to have that informal feedback without a fear that we, for example, might see it on the front page of the newspaper the next day or something like that. And I think that level of that issue of confidentiality is actually in some ways more important in terms of how we interact, rather than those individual investigations that you were talking about. On the ombudsman schemes, yes, we're certainly seeking to increase our interaction with some of the key schemes, including the TIO, and we have been in this area. I mean, there are some confidentiality issues that those schemes face as well. Sometimes it may be difficult to get information from them about particular problematic industry members because of the way that their schemes work. And I think this will be an ongoing issue, not just in telecommunications, but in a range of areas, in terms of how much information they can put out about the conduct and complaints trends of their individual members. Some schemes publish that openly in other jurisdictions. It's just an observation I'd make. To finish off with one or two comments, well, someone once said to me that the role of a regulator is to make sure that all stakeholders are equally unhappy. But then this was corrected by a recent academic who said, no, that's actually, you've misunderstood that. The role of a regulator is to disappoint people's expectations at a sustainable rate. So they're both very attractive and rewarding job descriptions. But you'll be pleased to know that that's not where the ACCC sees itself, or how we see ourselves operating. As I've said, this area in particular is one where we see the need for significant improvements in the way that, or the sort of outcomes that consumers are getting in the market. We see the scope for better interaction with ACCAN and its member organisations and other consumer organisations on the consumer side. And initiatives like this, I think, are terrific, and I've got a lot of ideas that I'll be looking to take forward, great. So thank you.
Delia, have you got a lot of ideas?
I have got a few from today, yes, so thank you. On confidentiality, I can really only echo what Peter said. There's a real difference between investigations where you really just, you just have to abide by all of the rules there, to where you're looking at working out your own views on regulatory policy, etc., where it's important, I think, to be able to have confidential conversations with key stakeholder groups, be they industry or the consumer sector, to bounce around some of those ideas and to get that initial feedback before you start going public. And as long as that confidentiality is respected by all sides, I think it's beneficial. So yes, a real distinction between investigations and policy. On systemic issues and EDR, I think it's a really important point that you've raised, and I'm not sure how it works in the telecommunications sector, but certainly in the financial services sector, EDR schemes have to be approved by ASIC, and one of the requirements of our approval process is that they must report to us any systemic issues they're seeing on a quarterly basis, which means that A, we're aware of them, and B, it brings it to their attention to try and deal with something, and they have to report back on any one that's raised in the next quarterly report, so that brings it to our attention, and we can go back and seek information through notices from them. And I think it's proved to be quite a useful provision to have. Finally, look, I want to congratulate you, Alan, on holding this. I think it's a really useful forum, and it has set us away with a lot of ideas. Unlike Peter, I'm not quite as pessimistic about the role of regulators, though I do always counsel young and enthusiastic staff about incremental change, which is the mantra, if you want to say in some days. But I do think that there's a real role for regulators in sort of brokering those win-win solutions and being the interpreter, if you like, over here, between the sort of extreme ends of any debate. So thank you.